Hello, you're watching the Great Canadian Bagel, and today we have a Manitoba election update. I'm not sure how many of these we're going to be able to get in before Election Day on October 3rd. I really hope we can have more coverage, but it really depends on polls, because if I don't have polls, I don't have data, and if I don't have data, I could tell you what's going on in the news, but it's hard to analyze the impact of things without data to compare to. So we will see going forward. But before we start the main video, I would just like to thank all the channel members for supporting the channel. And if you guys, or if anyone else would like to support the work I do, and you have some money to spend, by all means, join below at the channel membership thing. If you don't, I understand. In that case, what you can do to help the channel is like, share, subscribe, all of the other big, helpful YouTube things you can do. It might not seem like a lot, but they all add up. Thank you. Now, no further ado, let us begin. So, we don't have a lot of data. That's just the most blunt thing to say here. There's not a lot of data for the Manitoba election. And in fact, I will just bring over the list of publicly available polls here. You'll notice we've only had 2 polls this summer. Not a lot of data. But we have some data. And Main Street, despite some people's in the Politico polling sphere, for some reason disliking them, is solid. They're not the best pollster, but they are definitely the top couple, if that makes sense. Especially considering Main Street is one of the more prolific pollsters. That actually is quite useful. But, so we don't have a lot of data, but we have some data. And it looks like what's happening here is the race is getting closer. Now, this is something I sort of expected from, or the race to trend to, because the data on the PC vote retention had a lot of undecideds. Now, usually Canadian polls will take undecideds and will distribute them proportionally, or in more technical terms, they just remove them from the sample. Now, there's some people who disagree with that or think it's bad or whatever. But in the grand scheme of things, it's fine. Now, you have to do things to account for polling bias and polling error and such, but it's pretty predictable. You can mathematically correct for it. I do it, and I get very accurate on popular vote most elections. Now, why would a lot of undecideds in the PC vote retention column, so 2019 to 2023, matter? Well, in the grand scheme of things, usually party partisans, i.e. people who voted for a party in the last election, don't vote for the opposite parties. In a fairly strong two-party system like Manitoba has, you're not going to see many PCs defect to the NDP and many NDPs defect to the PCs. They happen, they exist. Usually they're in the ballpark of 10-15%. 15% being very high for an incumbent losing, usually 5 to 10% for an opposition party who is doing adequate. 5% range might be seeing an opposition party that's going to win. They're retaining most of theirs and stealing voters from the other party. Most of the main changes in elections, from all the research I've done, really appears to be more, at least in Canada or someone like the US, based on turnout. People who are aligned for the PCs or aligned for the New Democrats, at least in vague terms, not voting or voting usually matters more than defectors. And what we were seeing in a lot of the polls for the PC is they had in the realm of 15 or so percent defecting. Sorry, not defecting, staying home. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot in absolute terms, but when you consider, and this is a very important thing to consider, 15% of the PC vote share, they got about 50% last election, I think it was 53. That's nearly 8 points. It's a lot of voters. Just to give you an illustration of what I'm referring to, here is the last Pro poll. Now, it's 2 months old now. This is from June of 2023. Nearly 3 months, really. But we see what's going on here. We had 12% undecided PC voters. What I suspect is happening, and what seems to be happening, is these voters are looking at the election, they're looking at the NDP, they're looking at the PCs, they're looking at Stephenson, they're looking at Canoe, and they're voting PC now. A lot of them are no longer on the fence, they're going to vote PC. Because usually what this means in this table, an undecided voter here doesn't mean it's a 2019 PC voter who's like, should I vote NDP? Should I vote PC? Usually that's not what that means. Usually it's, should I vote? Almost always, when a voter wants to vote or is considering voting for the opposition, they usually lean to them. They're not undecided. Undecided is really more, I don't really like any of my options. Not, I don't know who to vote for. Okay. So what has changed? Why are they considering they should vote for the PCs? Well, there's probably two big reasons. The first one is, well, you, the viewer here, I mean, this is an election time, so you might be a Manitoban viewer who's checking in on things right now to see what's going on. But most people, and most of my viewers are, sorry, I phrased this wrong. Most of my viewers, most of you guys, are too politically active, likely, to not be aware of what's going on. If you're watching a channel about election forecasting, you probably have a decent idea of what's going on. Most people don't watch channels like this, or else I would have tens of thousands of millions of viewers, and that would be fantastic. But I don't. Most people don't watch channels like this. Most people don't look at the election news in detail. Very few people look at polls in any meaningful fashion. They might look at headline numbers, but that's about it. Not any more sophisticated than that. And that's fine. Not everyone has the time to do that. But what we expect because of this is that come election time, the average Joe who's not paying attention between elections is going to look during the election and be like, well, what are my options? What's going on? And some of these average Joes will tune into shows like mine, will tune into more mainstream cable news, might tune into their favorite journalist in various newspapers. They might look at polls themselves. And then a lot of these PC voters who are on the fence will see that the NDP might legitimately win the election. And they're like, I don't want the NDP to win. I guess I'll vote Stephenson. That's a big category of people, I suspect. I would also suggest, and this is the real big electoral test in this election, and one of the big reasons why the PCs were losing ground to undecideds, to people possibly staying home, is not because the NDP is some charismatic centrist party that's stealing PC voters. No, it's much more likely that the PC voters were dissatisfied with how conservative the PCs were. Now, there's nothing terribly wrong with how the PCs have run since Stephenson took over. There's really no blunders, there's no scandals, there's no big mistakes that I can see. If you know of any, by all means, comment below, and when I do another update, which I hope to do at least once more, because I'm expecting there's going to be some more polls before the end of the election. At least after the debate, whenever that happens. But anyways, we would expect... Wait, what was my train of thought here? Awkward. What we are perhaps about to see here is the first real electoral test of what I would call modern conservatism. I say modern not as it's quote-unquote new, but it's refreshing of the old style of conservatism. Now, I'm not here to say that Stephenson is some arch conservative. And I'm not here to say she's the most conservative leaning premier in the country. I would probably argue Blaine Higgs is that quite handedly. But what we are likely seeing is the first electoral test of it, because what the PCs and Heather Stephenson have done in an effort to shore up their base, an effort to bring back some of these PC voters who are just disenchanted because they don't feel the party's conservative enough, is they are promising to do serious action on parental rights if they win. Now, they're not just limiting it to the obvious, the copying Blaine Higgs Policy 713. Stephenson and her team have made it more detailed. They're talking all sorts of things about parental involvement in schools and other things. It's much more detailed, which you would hope from something that is an election promise. If it was just a minor rule change like Higgs did, you would expect and hope that they could have done that already. But this is a much more comprehensive package that does more than just inform parents about gender identity. It's more complex. It's too much to really summarize in this video, but that is their pitch. Why they should be reelected to conservatives. Now they have all sorts of economic issues that they're pitching to other people in the coalition that makes up the right. Better financing, lower taxes, etc., etc. And do not take this glossing over of their economic policies as me saying the economic policies of a government don't matter. Economic policy is likely, at least electorally speaking, the most important thing you can talk about. In general terms, you really only want to use social issues when you have a motivation problem in your base, and a specific type of motivation problem. Your economic policies are good and working, but your base is dejected and demoralized, then you pull out social issues and you campaign on those to re-engage and motivate your base. If your base is already engaged, then you mostly stick to economic issues. That's basic electoral strategy. Now, to contest this, the NDP have done a very interesting thing. And one, I suspect, we don't have data yet for it, but I suspect might actually hurt them. Though I can understand why they did it. It was a perfectly rational decision. I just don't think it was the right one. So what is this? Well, the NDP has been promising to basically do a lot of the things the PCs who are currently in government are doing. They're promising suspending the gas tax, reducing other taxes, reducing spending, etc., etc., keeping a balanced budget. Now, knowing the skew of my audience, this might sound like good things to you. Why would this be bad for the NDP? Or potentially bad for the NDP? Well, it comes down to electoral strategy. And this is not to say that the NDP should run super economically left wing. That would also be an incorrect thing to do. Generally speaking, the center-right economic policies that the NDP have now pushed towards and that the PCs naturally operate in are more popular. Controlled spending is popular. Lower taxes is popular, just to name two things. The issue for the NDP is by trying to contest those two things, they put themselves in a position where they can alienate their left-wing base, and they likely won't pick up many voters because party brands matter. Politicians' brands matter. The NDP brand is not a small business, pro-small business. It's not pro-small government. It's not pro-lower taxes. People don't trust the NDP on these grounds. So campaigning on these grounds is dubious. It's a very high-risk strategy and probably low reward. So you might ask, okay, what should they do instead? Well, I won't go into too much detail on it because I'm not here to give free campaign advice to people. If they want my campaign advice, you can hit my email and I'll give you a quote. But in general, what the NDP should do if it wants electoral success is it needs to look at policies that are naturally in the NDP wheelhouse, things that they can actually fix, things that are actually a problem in the province, and offer an NDP branded solution to those problems. If you offer a PC branded solution to those problems, and the PCs are offering the same solution to those problems, you're unlikely to get much buy-in. Now, this is not to say this can never work. Pardon. We have in the UK right now, the Labour Party under Sir Keir Starmer, anyways, he's doing a lot of policies, a lot of social ones actually, that are more naturally in a conservative wheelhouse. From one, the big one is he's promising to reduce immigration numbers. Why does that work for him, but Wab Kinew promising to reduce taxes isn't likely to work for the NDP? Well, it boils down to the party in power. The PCs are also promising to lower taxes, and they don't have a track record of raising taxes. So people don't distrust them on taxes. Whereas if you look in the UK, the United Kingdom's Conservative Party is promising to reduce immigration, but they have a track record of immigration blowing up into a catastrophic crisis while they've been in power for the last 13 years. And for most of that time, they've had majorities. So they could have done something about it, but they have chosen not to. Or maybe not most of the time, but a significant percentage of... Sorry, it is most of the time. Most of those 13 years, they've had majorities. They could have done something pretty easily about it, but they have chosen not to. That gives Keir Starmer the ability to do something about it, to contest that issue, because the Conservatives in the UK have failed on it, utterly. In Manitoba, there isn't really a case to be made that the PCs have raised tax burdens, have increased spending more than the NDP would have increased spending. At least by party brand. No one is sitting here and saying Heather Stephenson is actually just an NDPer. Some people are saying in Ontario that Doug Ford is actually just a Liberal or just an NDPer. And then the second one is very rare, to be fair. Because he doesn't control his spending. He just loves spending money. And he doesn't really reduce taxes in any meaningful way. So there, an OLP led by someone like Bonnie Crombie has a potential to do something if she campaigns the way she's suggesting she would campaign. Will it work? I can't tell you. We don't have polls. We don't have data. We don't know what she's running on. But you get the idea. There is the potential for a party to contest another party on something of their core brand if that party fails at their core brand. But in Manitoba, the PCs haven't failed on economic policies of their core brand. Where they're failing on potentially core brand issues is a relatively mediocre performance on social issues. But then Heather Stephenson, when she took leadership, and prior to her, what's his face? What was the last premier's name? Brian Pallister. There we go. They never really campaigned or promised significant social policies. They weren't saying that they're going to do radical social changes. They mostly campaigned on economic issues. So the fact that Stephenson is now saying she's going to go in and she's going to give things like the parental rights or expand parental rights legislation is her promising to do something. Now in 2027, let's say if we get this narrow list of majority for Manitoba here, we could see, if she takes no real concrete actions, we could see an NDP push on that front. But we don't. We're not there yet. And actually, in this election, now, from what I can tell in the news, it's not super clear to me. I do my best to look at the news of Manitoba, but there's only so many papers you can access these days because they're all, these days is not quite the right word. But with the funding I have, there's only so many papers you can look at because most of them are paywalled, so you only get 1 or 2 articles a month. But from what I've seen, or it was a week, whatever, you get the idea. But from what I've read and what I've seen, it doesn't look like Canoe himself is publicly saying anything. But the problem that the NDP has in Western Canada, Manitoba, Alberta, Saskatchewan, BC, is Jagmeet Singh, as the federal leader, tied to every NDP party in the country. Every single one. Drags the party down. He is giving voters the opposite painting to someone like Stephenson, where Stephenson is running as what you should reasonably call a moderate conservative, most fiscally center-right, proposing some you could call socially conservative policies. Nothing huge, nothing big, nothing radical, but small, select reforms. To paint against that, Stephenson, just like Danielle Smith just 4 months ago, has the capacity to really paint the picture against Singh. Because Singh is tied to this party. The people who selected and vote for Singh federally are a lot of the people who vote for Wab Kinew and who are likely part of the party apparatus that selected Wab Kinew as the leader of the NDP. There is reasonable belief in the minds of voters that Wab Kinew and Jagmeet Singh are correlated, that they're similar, that they believe similar things, that they can be lumped together. Because of that, it's very easy for someone like Stephenson to draw the analogy to Singh. And by doing that, Stephenson can execute a very powerful campaign maneuver by positioning herself as a fairly moderate with just enough inklings of policy to say, I am right wing, you can trust me. But you can paint the negative picture that Singh is very left wing. The NDP is very left wing. Singh's NDP opposes things like parental rights. He opposes reducing things like the gas tax. And by doing that, she's actually better able to position her party by not just giving her some small pluses on these issues, but she can show major negatives on the NDP side on these issues. And sure, you can reasonably argue maybe Kinew is sincere. Maybe he actually isn't going to do those things. But it doesn't really matter what the reality is. The first rule of politics is reality doesn't matter. Once you understand that reality doesn't matter, everything else about politics makes more sense. What matters is voter perception of candidates, voter perception of policy. Some people describe elections as vibes-based, and I think that's too reductive. Voters, well, mostly irrational, but you have to treat them rationally, which is an interesting conundrum. So they're mostly irrational. They are looking at policy. They don't rate policy in an objective manner. Now, we can even possibly argue in the grand scheme of things, are humans even rational to begin with? And that's a valid and debatable open debate. Are human beings even rational, period? But people don't rate policies on a rational basis. Because, first off, to rate Wab Kinew's and Heather Stephenson's economic portfolio, their platforms, on a rational basis would require so much information that your whole entire job would have to be comparing economic platforms and modeling them and what they're going to do. That is nearly unthinkable. No one can do that. I can't do that. You can't do that. No one can do that. Not even policy wonk places like the Parliamentary Budget Office or Fraser Institute or your favorite left-wing think tank can do that. It's basically and functionally impossible to rationally look at all of a platform. You can look at particular policies that matter to you, which is what voters do. Things are usually not vibe-based. They're usually specific policies. Now, most people aren't single-issue voters, but they might be 2 or 3 issue voters. And that's fine. At the end of the day, that's just how it works. You can bemoan human nature, but that's kind of what it is. So all you need to do from Stephenson's point of view to hopefully, in her case, expand her lead, or at least maintain her lead, all she needs to do going forward is she needs to make sure that the election isn't about something the NDP have strong brand associations with. What the NDP would need to do for Rabbit to probably win is for something to be strong brand for him in the NDP's wheelhouse. So far, that's not what's happened. Now, we have an incredibly small amount of parties here. Polls here. So anything I'm saying right now, while it is my best interpretation, my best understanding of the polls and what's going on, what's actually happening, what's actually being announced, the actual campaigns underway, well, it's my best interpretation of it. I can't guarantee any of this because there's not enough information. Unlike Alberta, we don't have bombardment of polls. We don't have a bombardment of news articles published in national papers about it. This is a pretty local election. It's a little higher notoriety than PEI's election, which is why I didn't really cover PEI's on a channel level video. There wasn't anything I could find to really say about it. There just wasn't enough information that I could get my hands on. But we are where we are. Now, before I wrap it up here, let's just touch on what this election is boiling down to in seats terms. So we really don't have many seats that are even remotely competitive. This is barely a competitive election in the sense that almost no seats matter. So we have Dauphin over here. That matters a bit. We have Selkirk here. That matters a bit. And then inside Manitoba itself, we have Assiniboia a little bit. Kirkfield Park a little bit. So I have to reference every single riding name because I don't remember these all. We have Waverley, Fort Richmond, Real, Lagimodiere, and Seine River in this little section here. These all matter a little bit, though Seine River is not as... No, sorry. Lagimodiere is less competitive. And we have St. Boniface, Radisson, Rossmere, River East, and Southdale over here. And I guess to finish off, we have Tyndale Park. So those are all the ridings that are even really in debate. And what is that? 1, 2, 3, 15. Let's say 16 if we want to add Brandon East. 16 ridings are really even in consideration. And of those, we have even fewer. We really just have St. Boniface, Tyndall Park, Riel, and Seine River, which are particularly marginal. We really want to expand the definition of marginal. You can bump those 4 up to 9. But that's kind of pushing it. Some of these are not that marginal. So let's say 9. So there's really 9 in contention here. And of the 9 in contention, the Libs are winning 1, the PCs are winning 3, and the NDP are winning 6. That's it. That's the election. Right there. We should expect, in the grand scheme of things, of the competitive seats in most elections, they should roughly split proportionally. It's first past the post, so it might not be exactly proportionally, but it should be approximately. If it doesn't do that, one party's really screwed up. You've made a colossal mistake somewhere if you're not splitting up the marginal ridings. We go this really expanded definition of 16. Then we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 going PC, which is about half, which is what you would expect. 1 going Lib, and 7 going NDP, which again is sort of what you would expect. So right now, what is competitive ridings and what is the vote share? This kind of makes sense. Now, by all means, if the NDP gain a little bit of vote share, the PCs lose a little vote share, this could change. But it seems a bit unlikely, and here's why. So we're going to bring this over here. That was too much. That's not very useful. We're going to do this. Here we go. So since coverage has begun, note we had a 25.4% lead in Winnipeg, and now it's dropped to just 15%. It's closed by 10 points. That's why this election that wasn't competitive, well, competitive is the wrong word, was easily being won by the NDP, isn't anymore. Winnipeg has closed dramatically, and it's closed dramatically in the second half of the summer after the parental rights discussion came into public notoriety, and Stephenson decided to champion it. That's not a coincidence. In the rurals, the PCs have regained about 4 points, and the NDP's flat. So, again, it makes sense. We shouldn't really expect much movement there. In fact, there is very little movement. I know there's at least one user on Twitter, and I don't fault him for this. This is perfectly fine. I view criticism as valid. But he's unhappy. I think it's a he. Anyway, it doesn't matter. If I'm wrong, correct me in the comments. I just assume everyone on the internet's a he unless shown otherwise. He doesn't like that Dauphin here. I have it going PC. Now, for the record, 338 doesn't have it going PC. They have it going NDP. Now, why is there discrepancy between me and 338 here? I can't actually really tell you why. Specifically, I mean, it's math. I trust the math of my model, but it is what it is. The math is the math. But there's some things like this, and I think it really boils down to the vote in the rurals hasn't actually moved that much. The NDP haven't really gained votes usefully in rural Manitoba. Just like during the Albertan election, they gained rural votes, just wasn't a useful display of rural votes. But, it is what it is. That's what the math says. So, what should we expect going forward here? Well, frankly, what I think we're going to see, and I'll just close on this note, is this election's probably going to be pretty close. And it'll likely not really change until the debate. I think the debate will probably make or break the election. Because even right now, with the 3-seat lead PCs have, if they lose 1 seat, it could be an NDP minority. Easily. They lose 3 seats and give an NDP majority. And there's plenty of room to gain 3 seats in Winnipeg. It's not perfectly guaranteed, but there's room. It could happen. So, well, I think Stephenson has the advantage the first 2 weeks here into the election. It's not bulletproof. And you should not be surprised if it turns out Canoe wins. I don't think he should, but it is a distinct and real possibility at this stage. But with that, I bid you adieu. Make sure you do all your YouTube things, like, share, subscribe, comment below, and stay tuned for next week as I have something different.